Hello, and greetings from Sumter, South Carolina. Sumter is named after Thomas Sumter, who was a brigadier general during the Revolutionary War. Sumter County is located east of Richland County, with the state capital and county seat in Columbia, and west of Marion and Florence counties. Marion County, which is the county seat at Marion, is named for Brigadier General Francis Marion, a peer of Thomas Sumter and known as the Swamp Fox. Thomas Sumter is honored in numerous ways within South Carolina. Both the city seal and the county seal incorporate images of Thomas Sumter. Two local high schools are affiliated with Sumter. First is Sumter High, a public high school known as the Gamecocks. Second is Thomas Sumter Academy, a private school known as the Generals. Next is Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, and Sumter National Forest, broken into three areas northwest of Columbia in the upstate. Finally, the University of South Carolina's mascot is the Gamecock, which is conceivably linked to Thomas Sumter. As Chris Horn states, the university attributes the Gamecock mascot to a 1902 football victory over Clemson, where students ran, quote, around with a drawing of a gamecock crowing over a beaten tiger, end quote. Officially, the USC Gamecocks are not attributed to Thomas Sumter, but the fighting chicken and Sumter are historically linked. With all the lasting accolades just reviewed, who was Thomas Sumter? Thomas Sumter was born on August 14, 1734, in Hanover County, Virginia, to William and Patience Sumter, and died on June 1, 1832, according to Edgar Walter in 101 People and Places That Shaped the American Revolution in South Carolina. During his life as a backwoods adventurer, an enlisted soldier in the French and Indian War, earning the rank of sergeant, a merchant, a businessman, a real estate investor, a planter, a slave owner, a member of the South Carolina Provincial Congress, soldier in the Revolutionary War as a lieutenant colonel in the Continental Army and brigadier general of the South Carolina Mission. He was a politician. He was a planner for Statesburg, located about 15 miles northwest of Sumter. A potential publisher, according to Thomas Stubbs, in an article titled The Fourth Estate of South Carolina, published in the South Carolina Historical Magazine in 1953. He was a 5-term congressman from the Camden District in 1789 through 1801, and a United States Senator from December 15, 1801 through December 16, 1810. According to Sumter's biography, Annie King Gregory, young Sumter worked on Benjamin Cave's farm with another boy named Lucas. Both boys enjoyed and participated in cockfights, which was a frequent backcountry form of entertainment. When older, Sumter tended his father's mill about 3 to 4 miles northwest of Purdy's Creek settlement in Albemarle County, Virginia. Similar to most frontier men, Sumter learned numerous Cherokee words, according to Robert Duncan Bass, author of Gamecock, The Life and Campaigns of General Thomas Sumter. Knowledge of Cherokee language would serve Sumter well in the future. When the French and Indian War started, Thomas enlisted and participated in the French-Duquesne battle near current-day Pittsburgh. He earned the rank of sergeant, according to Robert Duncan Bass. In 1791, Sumter served with Colonel Adam Stephen during the incursion into Cherokee country. Once the Cherokee conflict ended, Sumter was selected for a diplomatic mission with Lieutenant Harry Timberlake to deliver, quote, presents and letters of peace, according to Annie King Gregory. Sumter assisted a delegation of Cherokee leaders, including Chief Ostacoa, to the Continental capital, Williamsburg, resulting in an audience with then Lieutenant Governor Fauquier. After seeing a picture of young King George III, the elder Ostacoa insisted upon seeing King George in person. Eventually, the trip was coordinated. Sumter accompanied the Cherokee delegation to London with Lieutenant Timberlake. After an audience with King George III, the delegation arrived in Charlestown, South Carolina on October 28, 1762. Sumter escorted the Cherokee delegation back to the Cherokee towns. By the mid-1760s, Sumter owned a general store near Nelson's Ferry, currently submerged by modern-day Lake Marion near Santee, east of I-95. Sumter married Mary Canty Jameson in 1767. The couple had 2 children, Thomas Jr. in 1768 and Mary. Annie King Gregory stated that the only record of young Mary was in a 1770 will of Mrs. Sumter's brother, Samuel Canty. The will stated that young Mary died around 8 months of age, whereas family research reported Mary died around 4 years of age in 1772. Personally, I would give more credence to the account by Mary King Gregory than the account on family research on the web page. Walter Edgar reported Sumter participated in the following revolutionary battles or campaigns: the Snow Campaign in December of 1775, the Battle of Fort Moultrie, June 28, 1776, the Cherokee Campaign, July through October 1776, and the engagements in Georgia in 1770 and 1778. He departed the Continental Army on September 19, 1778, according to Edgar. Sumter returned to military affairs after the British burned down his home in May of 1780, which Sumter took as a personal offense, even though the British spared his invalid wife Mary and 11-year-old Thomas Jr. As James K. Swisher in the Revolutionary War in the Southern Backcountry wrote, intimidating tactics applied to men such as Sumter constantly backfired, for his rage and desire for retribution overcame all fear or hesitation, end quote. During a late summer backcountry recruiting mission, Sumter, wearing a blue jacket, approached the Gillespie brothers enthralled in a cockfight. The Gillespie brothers were notorious cockfighters that prided themselves upon the fighting spirit of a particular blue hen chicken named Tuck. Tuck was well known throughout the backcountry for never losing or refusing a fight. Sumter told the Gillespies, quote, that if they'd go with him, he'd show them the battle of men, end quote, according to Annie King Gregory. The Gillespies hailed Sumter as Tuck. The nickname Gamecock was established. The Southern Campaign. During the Revolutionary War, the British attempted to use the divide and conquer strategy first in the North and then in the South. A secondary British strategy was the hidden wellspring of Tory or Loyalist support that would materialize with British presence in a given area, according to Russell F. Wigley in The American Way of War, a history of the United States military strategy and policy. British campaigns in the North attempted to isolate New England, as illustrated by the Western New York campaign of Major General John Burgoyne. With an American victory at Saratoga and Sir Henry Clinton's withdrawal from Philadelphia, retreated back to New York, the Northern War became a virtual stalemate. Wigley stated, the British decided to exploit their control of the sea to a greater extent than they had previously done and to send expeditions to the South, end quote. To facilitate the Southern Campaign and the detailed discussion of actions by Thomas Sumter, a geographical orientation is needed. What you'll see on the screen right now is the district maps of South Carolina in 1778. And to orient yourself, in the upper right, you have Georgetown going down along the coastline in a southerly direction to Charleston District, and then Beaufort, and then moving up, you have Orangeburg, then Camden, then Kershaw, and then finally in the west, you have District 98, in the very upstate of modern-day South Carolina, you have the Indian lands. A second map is provided by author Andrew Walters. It was published in his 2024 book titled Backcountry War, The Rise of Francis Marion, Bannister Tarleton, and Thomas Sumter. And what you have on this screen is a map of South Carolina, you can see Georgia to the south, North Carolina, and you have a dividing line that distinguishes between the low country and the backward or back country. So if you locate where Kingstree is, which is northwest of Georgetown and northeast of Charleston or Charlestown, that dotted line there would represent the low country. Everything to the northeast would be represented by the back country. Now, according to Walters, he incorporates part of the PD, which on the map would be where you see Kershaw in the Kershaw district, but he incorporates for simplicity as part of the back country. You also see Camden as a distinctive point along with Waynesboro. The circle dots that you see along from Charleston all the way up to Cherokee country represents the Cherokee Path. And major battle sites, which we'll discuss later, are listed with a combat arms symbol followed by a circle. The dotted lines represent the districts that we just went through over the prior map. In November of 1778, as reported by Walter Edgar et al., in a Southern Carolina Chronology, 3rd edition, the Southern campaign against Georgia and the Carolinas began with the arrival on the Georgia coast of Lieutenant Colonel Archibald Campbell with British troops from the north. Whereas Wrigley reported that the Southern campaign began in late 1778 or early 1779, regardless of the precise date, the Southern campaign had begun with Georgia falling to the British. The assault on Charleston began on February 11th, 1780, when Sir Henry Clinton disembarked his army on John's Island, end quote, according to Edgar et al. Charlestown would fall on May 12, 1780, when, quote, General Lincoln surrendered Charlestown with over 5,000 troops and 50,000 pounds of gunpowder to General Clinton, end quote, per Edgar et al. This was a substantial loss for the Patriot cause. The fleeing remnant of the Southern Continental Army, led by Abraham Buford, fled north and was caught and slaughtered at Waxhaws on May 29, 1780, by Lieutenant Colonel Barrister Tarleton. By default, the Southern Command went to General John Baron de Cobb, who reluctantly moved to North Carolina. As stated earlier, Tarleton, on the way to Waxhaws, burnt Thomas Sumter's home, which was probably at Great Savannah. Today, Great Savannah is submerged under Lake Marion in Orangeburg County. The next major battle in the Southern campaign was the American defeat at Camden on August 16, 1780, which pitted Major General Horatio Gates against Lord Charles Cornwallis. The graphic illustrates the battle scheme maneuver, with Gates in the north moving south and Charles and Cornwallis in the south moving north. Paul David Nelson, in his scholarly article titled, quote, Horatio Gates and the Southern Department, 1780, Serious Errors and Costly Defeat, end quote, published in the Northern Carolina Historical Review, stated that upon the arrival in North Carolina, all of Gates' quote, actions appeared to have been motivated by haste that did not seem justified under the circumstances, even though some argument can be presented in his favor, end quote. The 4 errors included in the article are: 1, the lack of cavalry support purposefully left in North Carolina; 2, the path chosen to travel towards Camden, which was remote, barren of any potential provisions for an army on the move, and, quote, swarming with Tories, end quote. 3, the Continental soldiers, quote, were in no condition to begin operations, end quote. And 4, Gates had militia paired against British regulars, which caused the American line to break. According to Nelson, the need for haste could be contributed to, quote, Sumter's letter informing him of the need to reach South Carolina quickly in order to forestall the collection of enemy troops at Camden, probably played the greatest role in his planning, end quote. According to Nelson, this letter, dated July 17, 1780, and located in the Gates Papers, Box 14. However, was not able to locate the original reference letter. Thomas Sumter, according to Nelson, advised General Gates, quote, that if the American forces could reach Camden within 15 days, the enemy could be kept dispersed and defeated piecemeal, end quote. On August 3rd, 1780, Gates ordered Mayor Francis Marion and his militia forces to gather intelligence in South Carolina interior. Thomas Sumter and his militia were ordered, quote, toward the watery river below Camden with orders to disrupt Rawdon's lines of communication with Charleston, end quote. According to the American Battlefield Trust, approximately 5,930 soldiers engaged at Camden with the Americans losing 1,900 to the British losses of 324. The Camden battle resulted in Gates fleeing on horseback to North Carolina. General DeKalb is left to oversee the battle, becomes mortally wounded, and dies a few days later. The end result of this second major American loss in 4 months is Gates being replaced with Major General Nathaniel Greene, who does not arrive in North Carolina until December 1780. The American cause in the South is at its bleakest. The Southern campaign would continue on with the American victory by Daniel Morgan at Cowpens, followed by the American defeat at Guilford Courthouse, the American defeat at Hobkirk Hill near Camden, the American victory at Eutaw Springs, and ended with the evacuation of Charleston on December 14, 1782. According to Edgar et al., quote, British forces evacuated Charlestown, taking away some 4,200 loyalists and 5,000 enslaved Africans. The French and Indian War was a shaping event that influenced Patriot leaders in the way of war. According to Sylvia Neely in her article, Mason Leake Weems, Life of George Washington and the Myth of Braddock's Defeat, published in the Virginia Magazine of History and Biography, European military tactics were ill-suited to Indian warfare and the terrain in North America, leading to the idea that citizen soldiers were more virtuous and trustworthy than professional soldiers. People with a desire to protect their families and property were better fighters than individuals seeking plunder and loot. The romanticized concept of a more virtuous soldier or a more virtuous citizen soldier performing on the battlefield was proven false on numerous occasions. Camden was a primary example. With the fall of Charlestown on May 12, 1780, resistance to British occupation fell to militia groups within South Carolina. Thomas Sumter was a prominent South Carolinian militia leader. As David Keithley advocates in his article, Poor, Nasty, and Brutish, Guerrilla Operation in America's First Civil War, published in Civil Wars magazine, the British planned to subjugate Southerners, quote, precipitated in 1780 one of the most ferocious civil wars in history, where kinsman fought kinsman and neighbor betrayed neighbor. Loyalists often became confused, and dissensions from both sides remained a constant deliberating factor. Patriots discouraged loyalties from joining the British forces, even when this involved threats and violence, gathered intelligence and provisions for themselves and other friendly troops, and harassed the British on the ground and terrain they knew best, end quote, according to David Keithley. Backcountry battles in 1780, according to Edgar et al. And Andrew Waters, follow. May 29th, Waxhaws, where Tarleton caught and slaughtered Abraham Buford and his Virginians. July 12th, quote, Huck was killed and Loyalist forces defeated at Williams Plantation in a bloody action typical of the fighting in the Southern Carolinas backcountry, end quote, by Edgar et al. August 6th, Thomas Sumter attacked Loyalists at Hanging Rock. August 16th, Battle of Camden, which has previously been discussed. August 18th, Sumter, with a significantly larger force, was surprised by Tarleton at Fishing Creek with only 160 men, according to Edgar in 101 People and Places that shaped the American Revolution in South Carolina. This defeat marked a low point for the Patriots. November 9th, Fish Dam. Sumter repealed British cavalry and escapes an assassination attempt. November 20, Blackstock's Plantation. Sumter stalemates Tarleton and is wounded. In a December letter from Nathanael Greene to General Washington, enclosed with this letter is a report of the action of Sumter at Blackstock's Plantation on the Tiger River. The reports that Sumter was wounded in the shoulder. Modern historians, particularly John Buchanan and Walter Edgar, are critical of Thomas Sumter. Walter Edgar wrote that, quote, Sumter's pride and rash manner made him ill-suited to accept command from others. John Buchanan, author of The Road to Guilford Courthouse, The American Revolution in the Carolinas, described Sumter as wearing his ego on his shoulders. He had few peers as a prima donna and could spot a slight, intended or not, around a corner. He was careless with security and lives. His pretense for bloody and repeated frontal assaults was unnecessarily costly and led one officer to swear to Sumter's face and before others that never again would he serve under the Gamecock. James K. Swisher in the Revolutionary War in the Southern Backcountry described Sumter as an egocentric, overachieving prima donna of the First Order. When comparing Thomas Sumter's post-Revolutionary War career with descriptions by modern historians, why was Thomas Sumter propelled to the national political stage instead of fading into historical oblivion? This historiographical disconnect was the focus of my research project. The research thesis and question are presented on screen. David Ramsey, representing the partisan historiographical interpretation, described Sumter as, quote, distinguished partisan who is well qualified for conducting military operations. A party of exiles from South Carolina made choice of him for their leader, end quote. Ramsey attributes Sumter with, quote, a spirit of enterprise, end quote, with an ability to motivate troops in the face of adversity. Ramsey writes, his, quote, his zeal and acute activity in animating the militia when they were discouraged by repeated defeats and the bravery and conduct he displayed in sundry attacks on the British detachments produced him the applause of his countrymen and the thanks of Congress, end quote. James Swisher wrote, quote, his tireless energy, unlimited personal courage, and ability to inspire others made Sumter a most dangerous opponent to the British invaders in South Carolina, end quote. Andrew Walters in Backcountry War stated that Sumter, quote, Sumter had, quote, natural charisma and an acute understanding of the frontier psychology, end quote. John D. Bass described Sumter as, quote, stern, aloof, and taciturn. The Gamecock treated his men like peers, but courted no familiarity. He was a lonely and rugged partisan, self-reliant and provedly independent. To Nathanael Greene, he seemed a glory fighter, a Carolina freebooter, a backwoods cantieri, subsisting his private army by plundering Tories. But to the hungry, ragged, unpaid militia, he was a hero, a galliard bearing the oriflamme of liberty, end quote. Similar to other Revolutionary era figures, Thomas Sumter developed into a mythical legend, yet he was a complex but flawed human being with emotion and passion. The standard cliche comes to mind. You can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time. This applies to soldiers also. If Thomas Sumter was inept, as described by John Buchanan and Edgar Walters, then Sumter would have returned to the high hills and faded into oblivion or obscurity. But Sumter didn't fade away. Sumter was propelled into national politics. As Sumter's biography, Annie King Green, provides a clue to Sumter's success. To the patriots of the South Carolina backcountry, Thomas Sumter was a hero. He was memorialized in song attributed to James Harbison. I conclude with 2 stanzas of the 12-stanza ditty that illustrate many points presented during this American Revolution course. Quote, "Cheer up your hearts, Americans, and yet your spirits raise. And with the help of Providence, let us bold Sumter's praise. For he's a man of courage, as you can plainly see. He's a man that leads us on to fight for liberty. When we were first in banishment, bold Sumter took command, and on the borders of our state, where we did make a stand, for to subdue the English and keep down popery, Azusa for General Sumter, Azusa for liberty."